Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Spirit Drivers videocast. I'm here with our guest, Christina Marie Noel. We're so excited to have you here, Christina. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Fun fact, Christina introduced Greg and me. And without her, Spirit Drivers would not be possible. So we must thank you for that before we even get started, Christina. Little secret fun fact for everybody watching. And if you don't know about Spirit Drivers, it's a 4-month mastermind for leaders and professionals who are committed to living their vision in the face of uncertainty. And this video cast, we bring leaders who are spirit driven, vision driven, and who are helping others to do the same. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce you, Christina. So Christina has quite an amazing story and bio. So she's an award-winning social entrepreneur, marketing strategist, business coach, keynote speaker, and she specializes in helping mission-driven organizations and foundations and founders thrive. She's the founder and principal consultant at Noel Co, a marketing strategy consultancy that helps companies develop a go-to market strategy to grow their triple bottom line. And she's the founder of the Figure Your Shit Out Accelerator, a 6-month program created to give early-stage mission-driven entrepreneurs a safe space to test their ideas, hone their business models, and figure their shit out in community. So during the 8 years Christina has been a social entrepreneur, she's helped more than 50 mission-driven organizations develop and improve their marketing and business strategy. She has also been a leader with the B Corp movement, the Benefit Corporation movement, which is a community of leaders driving a global movement of people using business as a force for good since 2013. In 2015, she received the B Corp MVP award, given annually to the single person worldwide that has most impacted the B Corp movement, in recognition of her community building leadership in her home state of North Carolina. Wow. It is an absolute honor to have you here, Christina.
Oh, well, I'm so excited to be here.
And tell us what you've been up to during Corona. Nothing, right? You've just been sitting at home.
Totally. I've been so bored. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's funny. I mean, today we're talking about pivoting. I'm like, oh, Corona happened, and whew, I mean, it's been a busy time. And yeah. I mean, being a mission-driven entrepreneur, like it hit, and I'm like, okay, I've been working remote for years. What can I do? Like, how can I help people? How can I serve? We were about to launch the second cohort of the Figure Your Shit Out Accelerator, or FISO, as we'll call it. And I was like, oh no. Well, number one, there's a pandemic, so people are going to need to figure their shit out. So like number one priority was how to make FISO work in this new world we're living in. So we actually went virtual and launched our second cohort in June. And so that was like 2 months of work to just transition the whole plan and the strategy and adjust. And then also fun, as you know, one thing that I started too is I was trying to figure out how to stay connected. And so I started this whole like virtual lunch group that met pretty regularly right when it all hit. And that was a really powerful experience for many, many months. I mean, that's actually one of the ways we've stayed so in touch, and how I introduced you and Greg.
Yes. I'm so glad you brought that up, because what I loved about that lunch group was really how casual it was. You could just show up with whatever you had. You had a sandwich in your mouth and you were just there to connect with people. There was no real structure behind it. And that was actually the magic of it, because people could really just connect. And that's exactly how Greg and I connected. And that was so beautiful during a time when all of a sudden everything was just up in the air and we couldn't see anyone. And it was really scary at that moment, because when you started it right in the moment when everything blew up. And that was when we really needed those grounding connections. And also for me, it was something exciting, because I was meeting new people that I had never met before through that lunch group.
Yeah, I mean, with everything, with any kind of disruption or any kind of crisis, there's pros and there's cons, right? Like, I wish it hadn't happened. I don't like there's a pandemic and people dying. And at the same time, I've also still built community and continued to network, and you don't have to drive all around. And so there's been some stillness that in some ways has been powerful and impactful. And so,
Mhm.
you do what you can to make
Yeah.
the best of a, challenging situation.
Yes, and I'm really excited to hear your particular thoughts about pivoting. And because we've already talked about two ways that you were able to pivot during COVID. Spirit Drivers was a pivot during COVID, and I'm really excited to hear you talk about the courage and the 3 tips that you have for everyone who maybe some people are feeling stuck, because that's one thing that I've heard a lot of is not everyone immediately was in action around changing up their game. And that's okay too, because it's also natural to feel stuck sometimes.
I know.
But and so and if you have been feeling stuck, if you're watching this and you've been feeling stuck, get ready, because Christina's energy and her vibrancy and her way of being is just going to shake you up and wake you up. I'm really excited for that. So what we're going to do for the rest of the interview is Christina's going to share her first 2 tips for finding the courage to pivot in 2021, because we're already planning for 2021, of course.
Crazy.
And yeah, and then she's going to share a gift, a surprise with all of us. And then she'll share her 3rd tip. So make sure to stay to the end of the interview to hear that 3rd tip.
Yay. I'm excited to get started.
Yes.
Oh, pivoting. It's so, we ended up landing on this subject because it's something that's like near and dear to my heart. And I mean, and when I think of pivoting, I also think of being at a crossroads in your life, right? Like, and these things happen, but whenever you're in a crossroads, it just feels awful. At least for me. Like, I love having a plan. I love having direction.
Yes.
And yet, I mean, 3 years ago, I ended up in a huge, life pivot. I had always worked in a job, like a stable job, other than going to grad school. And then I worked at a certified B Corp. So I worked at a mission-driven company, which felt like a dream come true. But then I started this like amazing creative project where I was interviewing people who changed the world. And what I didn't know is when I started that project, in turn, it ended up changing my life. And I realized I wasn't living the life that I really wanted to live. And I wasn't showing up in the way I really wanted to. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but it was always that like, it's like 2 years, in 2 years, like we'll do these life things. I'll make the impact here. And then in 2 years, I'll figure it out. And for some reason, I mean, the universe had a way of like kind of pushing you out of the nest.
Yeah.
And, multiple things happened, and it was time. Like I burned myself out. I was feeling pretty sick, interestingly. Like if you end up burnt out, it can have a huge toll on you, especially if you're mission driven. And it was time. Like I was like, why am I going to wait 2 years? Like if I keep waiting, will it ever even come?
Wow.
And so I am married to an amazing person, and my husband asked me, he was like, what do you want to do? And I'm like, I want to go like build a mission driven company. And he's like, okay, go do it. Like ever since I warned him when we met, I was like, I will be an entrepreneur one day, just FYI, like if that makes you uncomfortable, then I'm not for you. And
well done.
Yeah, you got to manage.
I should have warned my husband about that before.
Yeah, it is not easy being married to an entrepreneur. And I took the leap, but then I was at a huge crossroads. So like I had an interest in photography. I loved marketing and strategy. I was working on the storytelling project. So I had questions around, did I want to start a media company? And I didn't know. And so, what was I going to do? Like I pivoted my life. I had all these options in front of me, and the first tip that I have, and I remember it actually comes from Seth Godin, and it's at some point you have to pick a strategy. Like it's painful, but you can explore, but you at least need to go in some direction. And so for the first few months, the direction I went was, I was like, I know I'm doing this storytelling project. So I don't know if I want to start a media company, but let's dive, that's something concrete, and I'll start freelancing. And so like, I people paid me for photography. I freelanced as a marketer. So like my strategy was like, and then I told these stories and I was like, let's try these things. That was my strategy. But then eventually I need to pick something. And so after about 6 months, I ended up going on a road trip. I'd also like, because I wasn't sure the direction I wanted to go, I'd isolated myself, which I don't recommend. We'll talk about that. And where I landed was, number one, I loved working on different projects. So interestingly enough, where I landed with, I was like, I love consulting. I love having, different projects in the air, number one. And then number two, this whole loneliness thing, it became obvious that there was a need in the world for community, right? And for support for entrepreneurs that are mission driven or that may be at, a transition in their life, and they need community and they need tools and they need skill sets. And hey, I happen to be good at marketing and strategy. I can solve this problem. And so that is how the Figure Your Shit Out Accelerator was born. That's also how Noel Co was born. I ended up picking 2 strategies, but like getting there was tough. Yeah. And so one of the things I highly recommend is I've created this tool, or really, I think I first heard about it at NC State, but I've seen it in multiple different places. It's called a decision matrix. And it's basically a tool that you can use that I know Elise is going to put an article about it.
I'm going to put this in the chat right now. Yes.
In the chat. But it's a tool that you can use to look at your different options and then actually weigh them based on like a point system that you can create. And all it is a tool that gives you data. It is not definitive. If you do the decision matrix, so like, for example, I had photography and I had consulting and I had media company. I realized like by the fall, I was like, I do not want a media company. Like media companies are a struggle right now. And that wasn't what lit me up. And what really drove me was this idea of like helping mission-driven businesses, organizations, and founders thrive, like creating the next generation of like purpose-driven jobs and purpose-driven leaders. Like that's what fired me up. And so that's how I like ultimately settled, and also what was going to make me money. So within a decision matrix, you have to think about money. Yes. And, quality of life, and do you like the work, and is there a demand for the work, and how quickly can you like implement the idea? And like based on all these different factors, you can get a sense of where should you start. And I love it if you fill it out and you're like, ooh, I don't like the number one choice. Great. Then go and look at your factors and how you weighted them and try to see and think about what did you potentially weight wrong? Like, why is that first one not the right choice? I mean, go with your gut. Like at the end of the day, like there's no right or wrong answer. You just have to pick what makes sense to you and go in some direction, because I highly recommend this podcast. It's called Startup School. It was with Seth Godin. It's like old school. And he like pulled together a bunch of entrepreneurs. And I remember listening to this when I was at that crossroads, and one woman raised her hand and was like, Seth, like I have all these things I'm interested in and I just can't pick. And he's like, all of us have lots of interests. We all like lots of types of food. And yet every day we decide what to eat for lunch. And he's like, the only thing that's not going to work is if you don't choose a strategy. Because if you're just all over the place, it's hard to do one thing right. I'm stubborn and I've done 2 complementary things and people still think I'm crazy. Yes. And it's true, like you can only do so much well. And so the more focused you can get, the more likely you are to succeed and thrive.
Wow, I'm relating so hard to this right now as I'm in my 2nd year of entrepreneurship myself. And it's just been like, I've had moments of just crying and confusion and of this desire for clarity and for direction. And it's so scary to choose. It's so frightening because you don't want to go in the wrong direction. I guess that's the scariest thing, is that you're going to go in the wrong direction and then you're going to have to pivot again. But that's the thing, is that
that's the process.
That's the worst that can happen, is that you go in a direction and then you realize that that's not the way you want to go. And then you go in another direction. And I've recently pivoted. I've decided to pivot just a week ago from relationship coaching to more career coaching, helping people find their purpose in their job and transitioning out of a job, because that's what aligns better with spirit drivers. And I recognize that I couldn't hold two different businesses in my hands. And I needed one unified message, and it's about vision and purpose and meaningful work. And so it's like, and with yours, with FISO and Noel Co, they're different things, but they have the same message.
Right. It's business strategy with a mission. Like, how do you create purpose-driven jobs? How do you build a life that you love? And like, I believe you shouldn't have to choose between purpose and profit. So how do we do that? Like, you have to have a thriving organization that has resources to pay people well and allow them to also have a life outside of work.
Yes.
And so, that whole growth, understanding strategy, understanding business models, and even, so then we go into tip number 2 and building community, right? Like, so my number 2 piece of advice is whenever you're going through a pivot, you need community. I don't care where you get it. Is it spirit drivers? Is it figure your shit out? Is it something else? Can you build it on your own? That's how I got my community, right? The problem was it took a year and a half, and I really needed it when I quit my job, right? Like, when I was like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. Like, it's such a vulnerable period.
Yes.
And yet, like, once you've gone through it, like, if we can normalize that, honestly, you probably are going to pivot once, twice, maybe 3 times. And when it happens, it feels awful. But if you're in a community of entrepreneurs, you're going to quickly realize, oh, Christina went, down one path for 5 months and then realized it wasn't the right path. And she learned a bunch, and then she had to kind of throw it, she like had to let it go. And but when it's you're like, oh, like, how did I waste like 5 months of my life? Like, you're like, what? Even understanding like what business model will work. Like, for example, like serving entrepreneurs, not always the most lucrative work unless it's done at scale. Whereas, with a consultancy, like when I'm working with more established organizations or with funded organizations, that's a lot more sustainable of a business model. Well, that took me a good year plus to figure out, right? Like,
totally.
And I'm like, why didn't I figure that out? And what's now obvious to me wasn't obvious then. And that was a journey I was meant to go on. But like, in having community, I've realized I am not the only one who's had to adjust, right? And it's normal. And if you have community, you don't have to do it alone. And then also, I think with community, you'll get there faster.
Yes.
Because if you have the right people, you have to be also really careful who you get advice from, because you don't want to abandon something too soon and then have regrets. And at the end of the day, I even say, like, I'm a marketing strategist and business coach, and I'm like, look, I will never have a definitive answer. There's never one right strategy. I can give you my best hypothesis, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to test and you're going to iterate. And any client that I work with, you're going to know your customer more than anyone. You're going to know your market. And what you're going to learn is the market there? Do they demand what you do, right? How can you best serve that market? I can help. I can help you ask the right questions. I can help, I've seen a ton and there's value in that, but you have to make the strategic choice. You have to decide what's going to be best for your market. You, at some point, like, have to ask yourself the hard questions, right? And with the right community, it can be more about asking questions rather than, you shouldn't do that. Or like, have you thought about this? Or like, hey, I think that's a dumb strategy. Because how would anybody know that? Like, they don't know your customer. Like, people shouldn't be giving you advice unless they're in your industry. And even then, you might be seeing something they don't. So.
Wow. Again, resonating on so many levels. What I have found that happened to me when I was trying to make my pivot and make a decision was I was getting really in my head. And when I'm stuck in my head and thinking and trying to figure it all out by myself, there's so many doubts in my head, and it's just a mess, honestly. And the second I start to just have a pitch or or a project or an idea and call someone up and say, hey, what do you think about this? And just, run it through somebody trusted, somebody who I know isn't going to like give me unsolicited advice, right? Because I totally agree with that too. But the second I was just getting it out there and talking to as many people as possible, the faster you realize what works and what doesn't work. The faster you realize, oh, this isn't the right direction, or this is the right direction, or there are parts of it that are and parts of it that aren't. You get that feedback, and so that's part of it. And then the other part is recognizing, that this is a process that we all go through. We all go through this need to, as an entrepreneur at least, to figure out. And even if you're working a business, you could be going in a career direction for 5-10 years and then realize that you don't want to do that anymore, and you're not sure what to do next, and being in a community of people who can ask you the right questions and just listen to you and say, hey, I've been there, and then maybe introduce you to somebody who would be interesting for you to meet to move in a different direction. That is where the growth happens. It doesn't happen by being in your head and sitting and trying to figure it out all by yourself. It just doesn't.
No, it happens by doing, and it happens by getting support. I mean, one great example is, so I built FISO, and then my consultancy was also starting to do well. And then I was terrified to launch it. So, I mean, it's funny, like I've created the solution that very much like helps. I was definitely my first customer. That is not always the case when you start a business, but I deeply felt these pains. These were struggles I had to overcome, and I freaked out. I was like, maybe I should just pivot and just do consulting. And I had to call my community. I called like 2 different friends, and I was like, I don't know if this is sustainable. I don't think I'm going to make any money doing this. Like, what am I doing? And they were like, you've already built it. You've already piloted it. There's definitely a demand. They're like, just finish the play, Christina. I know it's terrifying. I know you're afraid no one's going to show up, but just do it. And thank God, like I had people that knew me well enough to be like, no. You're just afraid. I mean, you're just concerned. Because I mean, that's another point about pivoting. I was going to argue and use fear as a justification for a pivot rather than actual need to pivot, if that makes sense. And I would have regretted that deeply. And thanks to my community, I made the right choice.
Wow. Can you talk a little bit more about that before we move on to the next phase? I want to hear more about like making a decision or a pivot out of fear versus out of your vision. What does that look like for you? And how do you know the difference?
It's hard, right? Because FISO is very like the accelerator is very much like a long-term play. It's like building a community. It's, we're doing pay what you can. That was one of our pivots. It's a pay what you can program because once the pandemic hit, I'm like, anyone that needs this community and anyone that needs the support needs to have access to it.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to trust that anyone who does have the resources will pay, and then anyone who doesn't will pay what they can. And now we're going to ask that people pay it forward once they're successful by eventually, investing in it. But, I was like, I don't know if the numbers add up, right? Like I was really afraid, like there's more lucrative directions you could go. But from a mission standpoint and from like a who I am as a person standpoint, I'd already built it. It's actually great for credibility building. It's like life-changing for me to be able to have built that community. And now actually I'm working to even find partners to take the programs to new sectors, because that need for vulnerability and entrepreneurship is just, it's gaping. Like if we're going to have like amazing, diverse entrepreneurs, we need environments that aren't about high growth, that aren't about competition, they're about collaboration. And so thankfully, I had my friends who had the foresight to be like, we know you love this work. We see that like long-term it's worth it. Yes. I mean, because the fear part, you don't want to talk about it, but I mean, it's terrifying when you're starting out or when you're in any kind of transition and you're putting yourself out there and you're selling something that's like deeply personal. You know, like for me, this is like the thing I needed, right? Like this is a deeply personal thing. This is like based on like a really hard, challenging time in my life that I went through that I don't want other people to go through. And, you know, and for that first cohort, you're asking people, I mean, I piloted it, but you're still asking people to take a chance on you and to like invest in something that isn't proven yet. And that was scary, man. Like it's just straight up, there's no other word for it. It's very scary. It's like, oh, like, is this going to work out? But here's the funny thing is now I'm like, so what? Like if it had failed, I mean, so it goes back to like also what's in your head versus reality. Like if it had failed, who cares? Like you think that everybody's watching and cares. Nobody would have cared. They'd been like, oh, bummer. There wasn't a market for it. Like, I don't think any less of you, right? Like I've seen initiatives that people tried to launch fail. And that's okay. It just means it wasn't the right product at the right time for the right market. Like you tried. Like that's all that really matters is that you actually tried and you put it out there. And if you fail, like that's not a failure. That's just a lesson. You just got more data about your market.
Yes. And I think that's something that really holds people back is that fear of what are people going to think? What are people going to think if I used to be a marketing director and now I'm an entrepreneur? Or what are people going to think if I used to be this kind of coach and now I'm another kind of coach? What are people going to think if I produce something and it fails and no one likes it? That's huge fear that isn't really worth listening to because
No.
What's more worth listening to is that calling that you had to do it, to try it, to experience it. And exactly like you said, when it launches and whatever happens, you learn.
Exactly. Like it just is the learning process. I don't think enough people talk about how failure is part of the process and risk is part of the process and vulnerability is part of the process, but also who cares what people think? Like do not live your life for other people. And the more you get into it, it's not like the fear goes away, but you just get a lot more used to it. Like even for this next cohort, I'm like, is anybody going to show up? I mean, it grew a lot last time, but I mean, I was still shocked. I was like, oh, look, this thing grew. And, you know, and even next time I'm like, oh, am I marketing it enough? You know, it doesn't go away. And I'm like, well, who cares? You know, we'll see what happens in January.
Yeah. And then you recognize that it really is all about learning. Like once you have that perspective shift a few times, I've needed to have it a few times, then it gets much more comfortable to go for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just own, oops, I changed direction. You know what? This fits better. So, you know, and if you judge me, then you're not my customer anyway. It's like another thing, it's kind of interesting. Like I've become more shameless in that I just care about my customer. Like what would my customer think, right? Like I want to be authentic, A, and then B, I want to meet my customer where they're at. Yeah. And so how I show up in that way, like sometimes I'm sure I have family members, you know, extended family or friends who are like, what is Christina doing on Instagram? She's talking about business again. Like she's always out there and who cares? It's not for them. I don't care. I'm putting myself out there for my customers. So
that's powerful. Yes. And guess who we have?
Oh, yay.
Hi, Greg.
Sorry, guys.
Hi, Greg.
No worries. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, it wasn't for lack of trying. Trust me.
Oh, I definitely trust you.
Good morning.
I'm still in pink wristband mode here so that you can see this. Yes.
Well, you're such a trooper. Thank you for being here. And Greg, I'll recap for you and for the viewers, Christina's 2 tips. And I'm sorry, I just interrupted. You were going to say something.
I'm just so happy to be here and to see both of you. This is great.
Thank you.
Even though my background is not suitable for the podcast.
You're here, and that is all that matters.
All right.
And Christina's first tip was, what was your first tip, Christina?
My first tip is there are no wrong answers, but you should come up with a strategy. So pick something. And then if you decide to pivot, totally fine. It's just part of the, process of learning, but pick something and consider using a decision matrix if you're stuck. number one. Number two, you need community. Like if you're going through a transition of any kind, you need to find your people and people who are going to be empathetic and supportive and help you be brave.
Wow. Great tips. Thank you so much. I totally endorse both of those.
Yes. These are tips that Greg and I have been living by for the past months that we've been working together. And now, Christina, we'd love for you to share your surprise that you have for everybody.
Ooh. Well, my surprise is it's a free 101-page founder's guide. So if you or anyone you know are thinking about eventually building a business or you already own a business and you want to grow it, when I was creating the program, one of the things that I did was I was like, how do I show credibility? Like, how do I show what I'm known, like through all of this experience that I've had? And so it kind of like, I was like, I put everything in my brain and just put it onto paper, and it turned into this like massive guide. I also went out and took photos of my community, of like spaces that inspired me. And the intent is, it's a guide. It's like real talk. Like if I was starting again, or when I talk to someone about starting, I'm like, these are the things you should know when you're building your business, how to talk to customers. And then once you're ready to grow, like my advice on how to go about setting up experiments with your marketing. So it's extensive. I'm excited to see what you think. And also, once you sign up, you get on my e-newsletter. If that's not your thing, at least stay on for 5 emails. Because I also have like 5 emails that tell you like 5 key points in case you're not going to read it word for word. I at least pointed out like the 5 most like surprising or unique concepts.
Rock on. Yes, I'm gonna download that because I haven't read it yet, and I think I could use it.
I think everyone can use it. Thank you so much, Christina. This is a great. Wow. Yeah, and also just a really quick little bit about Spirit Drivers. So as I mentioned at the beginning, it's a 4-month mastermind. We also have a guide on our website. If you go to spiritdrivers.com, you can download that directly. And it's to overcome fear, train your focus, and expand your capacity for generosity during uncertain times, connecting with your community. And it's a few tips that Greg and I put together right at the beginning of the pandemic, when we realized all of this was happening. And this is about how to train your focus towards your vision and not let all the craziness and the chaos and the fear get to you, but instead to be connected to your community and to continue to work on your vision.
I love it.
Yes. And we're opening our next cohort in January. So we're really excited about that. So you can also apply for that on the website. So thank you, everyone. Now, Christina, what is your 3rd tip if you are looking for the courage to pivot in 2021?
Wow. This is actually very much related to what we were talking about. And I mean, and what Spirit Drivers does, which is you have to know your why. Either, the problem that you want to solve, or, the thing that's going to drive you. And the more specific you can get, the better. So for example, and oftentimes, like, you may not immediately know it. It may end up being driven by things that have happened to you in life. Like mine certainly has been informed by my personal experiences. And mine is so much about, I am obsessed with how do we create more purpose-driven jobs. And so when I look at projects, when, opportunities come my way, I go, will this help create purpose-driven jobs, either through helping founders create, a better life and a stronger business for themselves, or am I working with an organization that's going to create great jobs? And what's nice about it is it's wide enough that, it gives me a breadth of experiences to work with, but also it's specific enough that I finally understood how strategic it is when I had a former mentor come to me, and it was an amazing opportunity. They wanted me to photograph this amazing nonprofit that was helping kids with disabilities. And I was like, oh, that's so inspiring. And I don't have capacity and I don't want to do it. and I was like, oh my gosh, like why? Like I would have loved to work with that person. I love the mission. And I knew in my gut, I was like, I don't have time. I'm not going to make time. It's not right. And now, that I eventually, like, as I honed in on what is my why, like what the problem I want to solve, what's the thing that drives me, I was like, oh, it just doesn't fall in the realm. It's still a great cause. It's an amazing opportunity. It just wasn't right for me.
Mm-hmm.
And as you like lead your life, as you build your career, right? Like that drives everything. It drives what jobs you might want to work at, what companies you might want to work at. It informs what kind of projects you might want to take. And then it also helps you, again, focus on what is most important to you, what's right, what might you want to take on that, might be a little over the top, and, and have those boundaries. But also, like, as an entrepreneur, it can also help you be more willing to pivot. So for example, like if you know that the problem you're trying to solve is jobs, for example, and yet you've built a program and people aren't interested, then you're just like, oh, okay, well, that's just, not the right solution to the problem I'm trying to solve. No biggie. But if you can, it's very easy to get excited about ideas.
Mm-hmm.
But don't tie yourself to ideas, tie yourself to what you're trying to solve, because that's how you can create unexpected solutions and end up in unexpected, amazing places that you never even thought were possible.
Wow.
That is great advice. We talk about this a lot, Christina, with I call it the red velvet rope theory, right? Which side of the rope do you want to be on, and what goes on the other side? And so what you're really saying is, once you know your why, that you can more easily choose the best things to do, the things to spend your time on, and the things that are going to really inspire your passion. It's great advice.
Absolutely. And, and then related to that too, I did this amazing interview with a podcaster I'm a big fan of. Her name's Jessica Mernan. And, and this actually is a big part of FISOs. We're very big into understanding your definition of success and then aligning a business and your life to that definition. But your definition of success can change, or why might change, but just as long as you stay grounded to what that is. So for example, like as you have a family, for example, your why might be, number one, my why is I want to take care of my family and I need to make sure I can provide for my children. And then, this other why that's related is I want to do this amazing mission-driven work, and it's okay if at some point in your life, you go and get a job for the money, or, you don't know your why yet and you make decisions that are just going to create great experience for you. Like, it doesn't have to be like all or nothing. And, I've talked to entrepreneurs who go through FISO and are like, I just want a job. Like, I've gone through this. I was excited about this idea. I know I can build a business and I miss people. Like, I miss being part of a team and I don't want to do this. And I'm like, that's awesome. Like, that is awesome. Like, you went through the process, you don't have any regrets, and you decided for yourself that your definition of success is now that you actually want a career where you have more stable employment and you work with people. Like, that's awesome, right? Yeah. Like, I don't think entrepreneurship is for everybody. And instead it's, what do you want? What's going to make you happy? And what's going to meet your long-term goals, keeping the big picture in mind.
And that just goes back to something you said before, which is you learn through doing, you learn through action. So if that person hadn't gone through FISO, they would always be asking themselves to, like, maybe entrepreneurship, maybe I should start a business. And then when they go and try it, and then they realize, wow, actually security and stability is more important for me than starting a business is.
And that's awesome. Like, because you're allowed to have those preferences, And I love that. And I think, in some ways, that's like what's helped make the program so special, is like, we don't have an agenda. We're not trying to like measure how much are you going to grow or like pressure you into some direction. It's, what do you want to do? And I also love that same thing with Spirit Drivers. Like, I love that you're creating a community and a program that's so much about mission and vision and values.
Right.
Yeah. It's really, it's just a context to understand that about yourself and live it and be in a supportive community around that. And when you, that's the amazing thing. Like you said this, Christina, when you're choosing a community to join, to choose a community that doesn't have an agenda to push you in a certain direction, but is there to just support your truth, whatever that ends up being.
Right. Well, I always applauded FISO, Christina, because there's a lot of people that think that being an entrepreneur is the most romantic thing they could possibly ever be, right?
And then you get in, it's like, it is the hardest thing you'll ever do.
It is the hardest thing you will ever do, right? It's almost like traveling for a living. It looks good until you do it, right?
Yeah. And I will say, once you get through the really, really hard stuff, there is like a light at the end of the tunnel. Like I'm finally like, oh yes. Remember those 2 years that were brutal? Oh, like, I'm finally seeing like this is all paying out. You know, it's like all going to work out. And I mean, really, but with entrepreneurship, it's a 10-year, like you do not make a lot of money. You really struggle. You don't feel like a rock star. You feel like a loser sometimes. You're like,
it's a lifestyle, isn't it?
Like, what salary did I give up? My MBA level salary? Oh. But if but what are the rewards, right? So for me, like the flexibility and the impact, and I believe long-term I'll get the ROI. So for me, it's worth it. Right. But it's not for everyone at all.
Yeah. Christina, can you answer, what does it mean to you to be in a purpose-driven job?
Ooh. You know, we spend more time at work than we do with our friends and family. And when I think of purpose-driven work, it's working in a company that's about more than just making money. So I mean, that could be a company that just, I like, you don't have to be a social enterprise or a B Corp. Like you don't have to be the perfect company, but there should be a greater purpose, whether that's to create great jobs and take care of your people, to take care of your stakeholders and care about the environment and your community and have give back programs. You know, for me, I very much realized, like I worked at a really good company coming out of school. I worked at a healthcare consultancy. They had a CSR program, so corporate social responsibility program, but it was always like on the side. And for me, it wasn't impact driven enough, but it was still a great company. Mm-hmm. And then, whereas, for me, I was like, I want to feel like I come in and like every day, the work that I have drive some purpose that's really important to me. And so like, it's really a continuum. But when I look at companies that I work with, like I will work with a tech company that has a powerful technology that also believes in creating great jobs and taking care of its people. And that's going to drive economic development. Like as long as leadership is mission driven and as long as leadership cares about something more than just making money, like I think it's fantastic, right? And then for the individual, you just have to decide, right? What, again, is that definition of success? Like what part of the continuum do you want to be on and what makes most sense for you at this phase of your life?
Your why.
Your why.
Your why. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you're somebody who's working in a company that isn't necessarily a mission-driven company and that they're not saving the polar bears or don't have a direct mission that's somehow, I don't know, huge and saving the world, but you enjoy the people that you work with and you enjoy the impact that you make on your clients and you enjoy the satisfaction of seeing your work get presented and get used in the company and you have a nice work-life balance, like that to you counts as purpose and meaning and fulfillment.
Absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, and I think it's so individual, like defining what is purpose to you and what you feel good about and what makes you excited to go to work on Monday morning.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. But that's the main thing. Yeah. Is how you feel about waking up and going to work on, not that it's always going to be happy and joyful, but overall the sensation of, I like this, I'm fulfilled by this because it is so much of your life that you spend there.
Right.
Exactly.
Well said. Thank you.
We need your tips, Christina. Let's keep her on for another hour and have her do another tips.
No, 5 more tips. 5 more tips.
All of the advice.
Well, thank you so much, Christina. This has been amazing. So to summarize everything, we've got number 1, pick a strategy. Don't be afraid to choose. You can explore for a while, but then go choose and go for something, take some action and learn from that action. And you can use the decision matrix that Christina has shared in the chat. The second tip is
you need community.
You need community. You need community like FISO or like Spirit Drivers or another community that you define and create, so you can get out of your own head and talk to people and recognize that you're not alone in the journey of pivoting.
Right.
And the final tip that Christina shared was to find your why and to recognize what success means to you, what purpose means to you, and to do that inner work, because that's an inner work that and your community can help you with that as you're doing that inner work and asking yourself those deep questions. So those are the 3 ways to find the courage to pivot. And we hope you take these tips into 2021 and have a successful year, whatever that looks like for you.
I love it. And
download the book.
Download the FISO Founders Guide. So we've shared that. And then if you're interested in learning more about FISO, you can go to fysoaccelerator.com. We're going to be kicking off our next cohort at the end of January too. So
fantastic. So is that the best place to reach you, Christina, if people want to reach out?
Yep, absolutely. They can email me there, or Christina@fysoaccelerator.com.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much again, first of all, for introducing us, me, Greg and me.
You're forever in your debt. Thank you very much.
For creating spaces where people can explore and connect and be themselves and find their own purpose-driven work. And for the work that you do in the world, Christina, you give so much energy to the organizations and the people that you work with, and you just pour your heart into it. And I've always really felt that and appreciated that about you. So thank you for being that kind of leader.
Oh, well, I appreciate it. And it's my pleasure. And likewise, thanks to both of you for having me today and for doing such amazing purpose-driven work as well.
Cool. Well, that is all for today. We are going to be back next week with another incredible guest, and you can go to eventbrite.com. We've actually got an Eventbrite this time for the guests in December. We're talking a lot from business leaders this month and hearing to plan your purpose-driven year next year. So thanks all for being here, and we'll see you next Tuesday. Ciao.
Ciao. Thank you, Christina.
Bye.